Donald Trump names a vaccine denier to head the Health and Human Services Department. For Attorney General, he picks a person who most likely wouldn't be able to pass an FBI background check. And he has nominated as Director of National Intelligence an apologist for Vladimir Putin. It's been quite a week at Mar-a-Lago, and there could be more in store for us this weekend. Next.
This is Washington Week with The Atlantic. Corporate funding provided by
Consumer Cellular. This is Sam. How may I help you?
This is a pocket dial. Well, somebody's pocket.
Thought I'd let you know that with Consumer Cellular,
You get nationwide coverage with no contract. That's kind of our thing.
have a nice day.
Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewan for the Ewan Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. Once again, from the David M. Rubenstein studio at WETA in Washington, Editor-in-Chief of The Atlantic and moderator, Jeffrey Goldberg.
Good evening, and welcome to Washington Week. Donald Trump hasn't filled his cabinet yet, but all evidence to date suggests that he's looking for two main qualities in his picks: loyalty to him and a loathing for what he calls the deep state. The deep state, of course, would refer to itself as that large group of professionals and subject experts who manage the government of the United States on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to talk about Trump's choices tonight with Elisabeth Bumiller, the assistant managing editor and Washington bureau chief at the New York Times. Leigh Caldwell is the anchor of Washington Post Live and a co-author of the Post's Early Brief. Francesca Chambers is a White House correspondent for USA Today, and Mark Leibovich is my colleague and a staff writer at The Atlantic. Okay, so this has been really quite a week. Elisabeth, let me start with you. If you could just frame this out for us, these nominations, especially Matt Gaetz, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and Tulsi Gabbard. What is this telling you about both Trump's mindset and the direction, the policy direction of the incoming administration?
Well, the policy direction is confused and chaotic. His mindset is just to, it's shock and awe, but mostly shock. It's some people have said it's trolling Washington. It started out somewhat normal this week when he named Marco Rubio, the longtime Republican senator from Florida, to the State Department. That seemed reasonable. Marco Rubio has a long history of being involved in foreign policy. His national security pick was a congressman from Florida, a conservative congressman, Michael Waltz, also somewhat normal. But then we got to the revenge of the deep state, the three agencies that gave him the most trouble when he was president the first time: the military, the intelligence agencies, and the Justice Department. And he put people in those jobs. Matt Gaetz, who is, by the account of many Republicans in the Senate, completely unqualified. Tulsi Gabbard, in charge of the intelligence agencies, she is a favorite of the Russians. They call her my girlfriend on Russian TV. And then, and then for the defense, we have Pete Hegseth, who was convicted of military crimes and then pardoned by Trump. So it's a rogues gallery.
Right. Mark, what are you taking from all this?
Well, I mean, clearly there's some shock and awe here. I mean, I think if you're looking at trolling, I mean, this gets an A, right? It's one thing after another. I mean, at a certain point, the trolling has to end, and you sort of wonder, how do these people run these massive agencies that have to be, that in the day-to-day have to, I mean, these are people, to sort of paraphrase what someone once said about Jesse Jackson, these are mostly people who have never run anything but their mouth, right? Or mouths. And, I mean, Kristi Noem, who's running Homeland Security, we wouldn't even talk about her. I mean, she's run, South Dakota? So
North Dakota.
North Dakota. Is it South Dakota?
North.
Sorry, North Dakota.
We apologize to the people of all Dakotas.
North Dakota.
Yeah.
A large, sprawling agency that is the Department of Homeland Security.
Right.
It is a big jump.
Right. Leanne? Thoughts?
Okay, so this is exactly what Donald Trump promised on the campaign trail.
Why does it seem like a shock if we know that he promised
That's why
this?
we shouldn't be shocked,
Okay.
actually. I think that we have to reorient our mindset of what is normal, what has happened for decades in Washington within the guardrails of tradition, the law, and everything else that we've known. Donald Trump is trying to throw all of that out. And he is doing that by nominating people who will do exactly what he says. Matt Gaetz for Attorney General, for example, he has no fear of creating chaos. He single-handedly created a very small movement to kick out the last Speaker of the House. And that is probably the least controversial thing that Matt Gaetz has done. And Matt Gaetz has also agreed that the FBI should be dismantled. Donald Trump wants to investigate and potentially imprison his political opponents. So putting someone in charge of a law enforcement agency like Matt Gaetz just is really continuing what Donald Trump said on the campaign trail. And there's always been that saying about Donald Trump, you have to take him literally, not
seriously.
Yeah.
No, seriously, but not literally.
But I think in his second term, he knows what he's doing. He knows what he wants. He thinks that he has a mandate to do whatever he wants. And so we have to take him seriously.
Right. Okay, we're taking him literally and seriously. Francesca, I want to ask you, stipulating that veteran Washington correspondents are not supposed to sit around and be surprised or shocked by anything. Stipulating it, what was the most surprising thing about this week to you? The most surprising appointment or nomination?
Well, I think that even those of us who had covered Donald Trump for 4 years at the White House, like I did, weren't perhaps prepared for the pace of these nominations as they were coming, right? You even had last Saturday night where he's ruling people out on social media, and he was firing and hiring people on social media too. But the pace at which it started to come right after the election again, so he started naming people right away, I think was in some ways a little bit surprising. But they have largely been coming through formal statements this time, which really shows you, that shows you what is actually different about the first time, because there has been more discipline this time in the way that his operation has been run. In terms of the leaks, you're not hearing as many leaks this time.
Which is one of his top goals, obviously, for loyalty.
But there have been fewer leaks. A lot of this has been attributed to the fact that he did pick Susie Wiles as his chief of staff, that there has been more discipline within the structure this time.
But wait, one second. Didn't Susie Wiles not know that Matt Gaetz was being picked?
These have been happening very much, on the back of an envelope. They've been happening according to our
in some
reporting.
ways.
So the discipline is relative.
Perhaps sometimes you don't know because Donald Trump is, no one knows but Donald Trump. I've also been cautioned that by his allies too. But I am saying in terms of there's been fewer leaks this time. There has been less of what I would consider talking to allies, less backstabbing and knifing than what we saw so far the first time around. But about the Dakotas, he has picked both the North Dakota governor, Doug Burgum, as well as the South Dakota governor, Kristi Noem. So he's doing a total raid on the Dakota governors.
Been bereft of
it's Florida and the Dakotas.
But
Mark,
I will say that if you want to point to one thing that surprised me this week, it was, I think, Wednesday after the Hegseth nomination followed by the Gaetz nomination. You heard Republicans are shocked. They are freaking out on the Hill, senators, Congress people. I'm like, what on earth were you expecting? I mean, you go campaigning for the...
I don't think they were expecting Matt Gaetz. I do not think they were expecting Matt Gaetz.
But the idea that, these are largely blind quotes, but the idea that anyone in Washington, any Republican in America who is serious did not expect this or is at all shocked by this is something I find shocking.
You remember the Monty Python routine, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition? I just was thinking of that. No one expected Matt Gaetz, except it is completely logical that he would pick, he says he wants loyalty, and he says he wants to blow up Washington.
There is one
surprised.
theory that Matt Gaetz would be the sacrificial lamb, that they would be able to, that he would actually, the Senate would vote him.
Do you believe the theory?
No, but it's out there that the Senate would vote him down, and then they would show their...
I think that's a viable theory.
Right. Let's talk about probably in some ways the most controversial idea, the idea of RFK Jr., a vaccine, not critic, but denier, essentially, to run HHS. I want you to listen to Kennedy being blunt about the issue of vaccines. Let's take a listen.
You've talked about that the media slanders you by calling you an anti-vaxxer. And you've said that you're not anti-vaccine, you're pro-safe vaccine. Difficult question. Can you name any vaccines that you think are good?
I think some of the live virus vaccines are probably averting more problems than they're causing. There's no vaccine that is, safe and effective.
Okay, so this is the person who's going to be in charge of the CDC, the FDA, Medicaid, Medicare, the whole 9 yards, right? How does this even work when you have somebody who doesn't believe in the efficacy of vaccines in charge of the national health complex, who is the supervisor of thousands of doctors? I just explain to me how this could possibly work in a way that doesn't bend your mind out of shape.
Well, there's no answer. I can't explain it. But what you can say is that vaccines are administered by states and local governments,
right,
not the federal government. One of the great problems with the pandemic was that we had this diffuse healthcare delivery system, unlike your countries in Europe. So in that way, they don't have to do what the federal government says. However, if you've got Robert F. Kennedy Jr. up there saying this vaccines are unsafe, it's going to have a huge effect on the general population.
Right.
And people, and it's not just, okay, so your child won't get vaccinated, or your child will get vaccinated, but as we have learned with the pandemic, everyone needs to be vaccinated.
It's the issue of herd immunity or whatever.
But he's also coming under criticism from conservatives. Conservatives such as former Vice President Mike Pence, who is taking issue with his stances on abortion. And you heard the anti-abortion rights groups today also come out against RFK after Pence said that the Senate should oppose him. So that's also throwing a different and interesting wrench into this conversation.
Does that mean that he could not get Senate approval?
I'm not sure at this point that senators are going to be following Mike Pence's advice, I would say, over Donald Trump's advice on these issues. And we were bantering about this before the show started, about whether anybody that Trump has picked would actually get rejected by the Senate.
Well, let's stay on that.
There's 50, Republicans will have 53 seats in the United States Senate. And no Republicans that I'm aware of, Leanne, have come out to say that they're going to vote against any of Trump's nominees.
Yeah. So I will say, first of all, remember when Republicans were appalled that Michelle Obama tried to put more vegetables in the school lunch program? Now we have RFK Jr. being the HHS, potentially
He's
HHS
coming to take
secretary.
your Pringles.
Yeah, no ultra-processed foods. So I am super skeptical that Republicans, that they're going to be more than that there's going to be the 4 Republicans that are going to tank a Republican Donald Trump nominee. The reason is Donald Trump is going to put a tremendous amount of pressure on Republicans to support his nominees. Remember, there's 53 senators. They need a simple majority. So there's going to be that pressure campaign. Then also, in addition to that, there are the online MAGA movement, the people who also put a lot of pressure on these Republicans to act in support of Donald Trump. These senators are going to be threatened with primaries. It is going to take a lot of political capital if Donald Trump continues to stand by his nominees to vote one of his people.
But there do remain in the Senate a handful. The Murkowskis
Lisa
and
Murkowski.
the Collins.
Yeah, those are the easy two.
Those are the easy two.
Joni Ernst, maybe.
Tom Tillis, North Carolina, he's up. Bill Cassidy, who voted in Louisiana, who voted, I think, he voted to convict a few years ago.
So, Mark, Elisabeth, plausible that RFK can get voted down or Gates can get voted down?
I think it's more plausible for Gates. He is so reviled and despised.
So it's a personal issue.
Personal
with Gates
issues.
on
He's
the
going
Hill.
after many of the senators.
Yeah,
right.
He's hated in the House.
Let me play you something that Gates said. I think this is sort of an operative quote of Gates and the sort of the mentality that we're looking at. Let me roll that.
We either get this government back on our side or we defund and get rid of, abolish the FBI, CDC, ATF, DOJ, every last one of them, if they do not come to heel.
Very, very big question in Washington. No, this is. I mean, this goes from across the sweep of departments. It's like, if you hear that, that's your new boss. Your new boss has said, I mean, he's going to be supervising the FBI. Obviously, the FBI comes under the DOJ. And the DOJ itself, he's saying he's going to abolish them. Why do the professionals, the people who are called or disparaged as the deep state, why do the professionals stay in government?
Well, there's a fear and loathing across the federal workforce right now in Washington. People are talking about moving. I mean, they're afraid of losing their jobs, obviously, but there's also because Trump has promised to make it much easier to fire them and to cut all waste in government. So there's many won't stay in their jobs. Many could leave,
right?
Which would be catastrophic to the
Do you think that's a high likelihood? I mean, it's one thing to posture and say, "Oh, I can't work for these guys. I'm going to leave." But these are good jobs, good wages, as Michael Dukakis used to say. And do you really think that we can have like a sweep of expertise out of the government?
Well, we also saw after the first Trump administration that there were officials who felt like they couldn't work for that government and they left. But there were obviously a lot of people who also stayed and felt that it was their responsibility, even if they disagreed with the President of the United States, to continue to carry out the functions of the government and prepare potentially for the next 4 years when whoever is president then. But it is important to also note that whatever any of these folks may have said in their personal capacity, that it's Donald Trump who will be president of the United States. He's the one who'll be giving orders. And the reason that he picked all of these people in the first place, as we were discussing, is because, one, their loyalty, and two, because he trusts them to do what he is asking. And I think it's not just about loyalty, it's about a trust that these individuals will carry out what he specifically wants them to do.
Right.
After the first time that he was president, he had individuals in his own cabinet rebuffing him.
Right, right.
I would just say that I think there's going to be a massive hollowing out of these agencies, both mass firings, mass resignations. I think it's going to be night and day compared to 2017, and it's going to make the built-in chaos of what this administration is going to try to do all the more so, given that these people again have never run.
Yeah, I reported a couple weeks ago of this conservative group who is trying to find all the people who work in key agencies like DHS, DOJ, as other places. That's just the beginning, and sending them emails asking if they are sympathetic, that they have been targeted because they are too sympathetic with Biden's policies or President Biden. So it is creating a huge fear factor within the federal bureaucracy that then this was before Trump even got elected. And so it's, there's a huge chill factor that's happening right now.
Right. Let me stay on the Gates issue and the confirmation possibilities. I want to ask Leanne and Francesca about Mike Johnson and Senator Thune and how likely they would be to block Gates if the report, maybe you could talk about that for a minute, because Johnson has just said that the Ethics Committee report on Gates is going to be suppressed, not allowed to come out. I'm going to assume that it's going to leak at some point. Do you think that there's a possibility that the information contained in that is so explosive that Mike Johnson, who is a conservative, family-oriented, moral man in his private life, is going to read that and say, no way, this guy is going to be the chief law enforcement officer of the land?
So 2 days ago, Mike Johnson said that if the committee votes to release the report, it's a committee of 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats. It's purposely like that.
Right.
And a majority is necessary to release the report. Mike Johnson said, if the committee votes to release the report, let it be released. Last night, he was at Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump. Today, he says he strongly encourages and advises the committee to not release that report. So I think that is a huge clue of, again, the pressure that Donald Trump is going to put on, regardless of how much people hate Matt Gaetz in the House of Representatives and the Republican conference, to not release this report.
And Mike Johnson is probably no fan of Matt Gaetz himself.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely not. But I will say that hopefully that report leaks for our sake. And you can leak it to the Washington Post if you would like.
Yeah.
But,
or the Atlantic, not the New York Times or USA Today.
But
Put your bids in now.
The Ethics Committee is actually, usually a very, very tight committee. Things do not leak from this committee. So if it does leak, that is going to be fascinating. The Senate Judiciary Committee thinks that if the report is not given to them from the Ethics Committee, that it will be part of the background check of the information that they get when they do the confirmation hearing of Matt Gaetz. But also Donald Trump is not committed to his nominees receiving FBI background checks.
So there is a difference between a Mike Johnson and a John Thune here. Okay, Mike Johnson is in his position with the support of Donald Trump.
Right.
Now, John Thune is a longtime senator who Donald Trump didn't weigh in that race in the end, but some of his allies did. They wanted Rick Scott for the position. He is not someone who has previously been known to have some sort of a close relationship with Donald Trump. And so both because the Senate is more insulated by its 6-year terms than the House of Representatives, where they have to run every 2 years, and just based on some of the things we've heard Thune say so far about how he believes that the minority should continue to have a voice in the United States Senate, he is going to be, I think, less than Mike Johnson, able to be as influenced by Donald Trump, and I think probably more comparable to the way that Mitch McConnell operated the United States Senate.
I want to talk a little bit in the few minutes that we have left about the cognitive environment or this split in the country. You know, two teams, MAGA, anti-MAGA right now. And there's this very interesting newsletter I read, Pirate Wires, by this guy, Mike Solana. It gives you really good insight into MAGA thinking in the Silicon Valley, people who are supporting Donald Trump. And he wrote, Trump nominated RFK Jr. to head the Department of Health and Human Services, rounding out a string of appointments that each have some part of Washington in, quote, disbelief. Others include Tom, quote, they can be deported together, Homan as borders are, Pete Hegseth as SecDef, and then in parentheses, this is the part that's really interesting to me, a Fox News star, according to libs, liberals, a decorated combat vet, according to MAGA. Right? And so it's, to me, this is like a very interesting insight, because both things are true. Right. He's a Fox host. And if you're anti-Trump, you're like, how could you possibly nominate a Fox host, a morning host, no less, or a weekend host, to be Secretary of Defense?
Not even prime time.
And weekend.
And nothing wrong with being a television host, apparently, but from the MAGA side, from the Donald Trump side, it's like, hey, why are you disparaging this decorated combat veteran? And so my question is help us understand why everything is so bifurcated. Mark, this is like an essay question I'm going to give you. But it's like the qualifications that people on the Donald Trump side see in these people are just not seen at all by the other side, and vice versa. Are we in the media, do we have to do a better job of explaining why people see a Hegseth as qualified for this job?
You know what? I hate to. I mean, there are so many theories out there on why Democrats have lost the working class vote, why they've lost Pennsylvania, why people aren't watching or aren't reading the New York Times or the Atlantic out in the middle of this, and these nuanced arguments. And if only the Democrats had been more nuanced. I mean, I think the biggest single factor here is the information environment. I mean, there are massive swaths of America in actually pretty much every state, particularly the red parts of every state, who are not anywhere near these kinds of conversations, and who are, mostly, the internet, whatever it is, the information channels, make it any kind of education about reality. I mean, again, there's not like an easy way to tie this up with a bow, but it's not. We're just not talking the same language.
But Elisabeth, I mean, you run the New York Times bureau in Washington. You're right at the center of this. How do you figure this out going forward so that people understand on both sides why the other side might think the way it does?
Well, we go out into the country. I mean, the national desk does. We're here in Washington, but we had a conversation this morning at the Times about shouldn't we go out and ask Trump supporters, people we actually interviewed for our polling, you know, who talked to us, about what they make of these selections. And our guess is that they're not paying very much attention to them at all. We're obsessed with them in Washington, and they're like, oh, that's fine. A military veteran, good for the Department of Defense. That's a good idea.
Right.
Or if they know it at all. That was if they're paying the slightest bit of attention to the cabinet.
Right.
I mean, so I think Donald Trump made people feel good. His supporters feel good. There was an emotional connection. He was a showman. I mean, we can go on and on and on about what he did. That is completely.
We ran a piece the other day by Mike Pesca that argued that people see the Democrats as the HR department of political parties. You know, it's there to kind of make you feel vaguely bad about things, and there might be quite a bit to that.
I mean, he's defied all political conventional wisdom for 10 years now.
Look, this has been a great conversation. Thank you. Unfortunately, we need to leave it there for now. I want to thank our panelists for being here, and thank you at home for joining us. Before we go, I want to note that November 14th marked the 8th anniversary of Gwen Eifel's passing. Gwen, who moderated this show for many years, was my friend, and like all of her friends and all her loyal viewers, I would love to know what she would have made of our current political moment. I'm Jeffrey Goldberg. Good night from Washington.
Corporate funding for Washington Week with The Atlantic is provided by Consumer Cellular. Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewan for the Ewan Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.